welcome to Still Coming, a space for raw, honest, and healing conversations at the crossroads of mental health, faith, failure, and the bonds that define us. In each episode, we will sit with hard things together, whether you're questioning your faith, navigating mental health, or seeking deeper connections. You are not alone on this journey. Now, before we begin today's episode, this conversation invites you to sit with some bit of discomfort and question your assumptions about failure. You might want to choose a time, place where you can fully engage with these challenges. There's something quite radical about admitting that we are not there yet, that we are all still becoming. In a culture obsessed with deadlines and ETAs and finish lines, this kind of honesty sounds almost rebellious. But what if growth isn't a victory march, but just a quiet, wandering path? I wonder, when was the last time you gave yourself permission to be unfinished, to exist in the middle of your story without rushing to the resolution? I'm sitting here today surrounded by books about success and personal development. And the irony isn't lost on me. I mean, here I am about to launch a podcast about embracing imperfection. And while these books promise 7 steps to guaranteed success, let me also say that I'm on my version 5 of the script that I have written for this podcast. But this podcast emerged from a very deeply personal place, from countless conversations with people who felt exhausted by the pressure to constantly improve and achieve. Like my colleague who broke down in tears, confessing how tired they were of pretending to be almost there. Or another peer who described the feeling like a perpetual work in progress among their community. And I've lived with this tension myself. I still remember the night I sat on my couch at 2 a.m., tears rolling down my cheeks, and I was listening to some random song. Suddenly, that thought comes to my mind, wondering if God really wanted me to be successful in the way our culture defines it. The question led to late night conversations with some friends who were brave enough to challenge conventional wisdom about achievement and divine favor. What we are creating here is different. This isn't a space for quick fixes or inspirational success stories, but it's a space where we can explore the messy, unfinished parts of being human. Today, we are exploring something fundamental: failure. And I don't mean the sanitized TED Talk version, but real life failures. The kind that leaves marks on your life. And before we dive in, let me share something that helped me navigate my own relationship with failure. I'm still experimenting with it. I call it the REST method, the REST method. Recognize, embrace, share, and transform. We'll explore this framework a little more throughout our conversation today, seeing how it applies to different aspects of it. And let me stop you right there to acknowledge that I am not speaking as someone who's mastered this. Think less of a wise guru and more of a fellow climber, someone who's right there on the mountain with you. Muddy boots, scrape knees, sometimes catching my breath, but still climbing. Always climbing. Because that's what we do, right? We keep going one step at a time together. Now, whether you're listening while commuting, doing dishes, or taking a quiet moment alone, know this: you're joining a community of fellow travelers, people who are honest enough to admit that they are still figuring it out, still healing, still becoming. Welcome to my very first episode of Still Becoming. Each week, we explore the intersections of mental health, faith, and human connection. And this is a space where we honor both questions and silence, both growth and rest. In this first episode, and in the ones that follow, we'll move through different perspectives. Some are cultural, some spiritual, psychological, and practical. Think of it like walking around a sculpture, seeing it from different angles. Sometimes we'll pause for reflection, and sometimes we'll dive deep into research. And sometimes we'll just sit with stories, mostly my stories. A few notes on how you can engage with this podcast. Feel free to pause when you need to process. Keep a journal nearby if you like to write. Listen somewhere where you feel safe to reflect. Remember, you can always come back to the parts that resonate the most with you. Part 1: Defining Failure, Cultural and Historical Analysis. What do we mean when we say that we have failed? This seemingly simple question unravels into something far more complex when we examine it closely. Historically, our relationship with failure has undergone a fascinating transformation. In pre industrial societies, failure was primarily viewed through the lens of survival: a failed harvest or a failed hunt. But something shifted dramatically during the Industrial Revolution. Researchers point out that this era marked the beginning of what she calls failure commodification. Is the moment when human worth became inextricably linked to the productive output. Have you ever noticed how quickly we define ourselves by what we produce or achieve? How often do we ask someone we have just met, "What do you do?" rather than "Who are you?" Take a moment right now. Try to define yourself. But here's the catch: you can't mention any of your successes. You can't list your achievements or your credentials. No pointing to goals that you have achieved, the promotions you've earned, the milestones you have hit. And you definitely can't fall back on your job title or the amazing organization that you work for. Feeling that discomfort? Notice how instinctively we reach for our victories, our accomplishments to prove our worth. And here's where it gets interesting. If we define ourselves by our successes, what happens when we fail? If our identity is built on achievement, what remains when things fall apart? Today, we are living in what some call the age of personal performance. Consider this. In the 50s, when researchers asked young Americans about their life goals, being well liked topped the list. By early 2000, being very wealthy had taken the lead. And this shift reflects a profound change in how we measure human value. and consequently how we define failures. In this cultural shift, there are some explanations on why my friendship struggles always felt so devastating. When I lost connections, it wasn't just about missing people I cared about, it was about feeling like I had failed at something fundamental to being human. In a culture that increasingly values achievement over connection, I found myself unconsciously applying productivity metrics to my relationships. I was asking myself, am I good enough at friendship? Am I efficient enough at maintaining the right connections? And these questions themselves reflect how deeply I internalized our culture of achievement mindset. When was the last time you felt like you failed? And what standards were you measuring yourself against? I'll share a personal story. I've often felt like I am failing at friendship. Outside of my marriage, I've struggled to keep close, lasting relationships. Some friends have faded away quietly, others simply stopped responding. And if I'm being completely honest, I've been on the other side too. I've been the one who stopped responding, who let the messages sit unread, who became the silence in someone else's inbox. And I often would wake up wondering if I had done something wrong, carrying what felt like a private grief. You know, the kind of grief that you don't get any sympathy cards for. Over time, I noticed the pattern. My expectations of friendship were very high, probably too high. I crave for a kind of closeness that I didn't know how to ask. And at the same time, I often held back emotionally, afraid to be truly seen. And that push pull left me feeling lonely, even in good company. Psychologically, this makes sense. We are wired for connection, but we often sabotage that through our fear, a fear of being either too much or not enough. I realized I expected friends to fill deep emotional spaces that I had not learned to hold for myself. And when they could not, I felt abandoned. Spiritually, I found peace through faith based detachment and forgiveness, letting go of the need for closure, trusting that God can hold both my ache and the people I miss. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply releasing someone so I can rest. Even now, I feel the quiet ache of friendships that I've lost. But I also carry more grace for them and for myself. I'm still learning on how to show up imperfectly. And maybe that's what real friendship is. As I dug deeper into understanding these patterns, I realized there were psychological underpinnings to my struggles. I've noticed a kind of push pull in myself, a strong desire for close friendships, coupled with fear of being truly vulnerable. It's like I'm caught in what some might call an intimacy paradox. You're wanting deep relationships or deep connections, but feeling safer keeping people at arm's length. But there are two beautiful exceptions to this pattern. First, there is my wife. She has the uncanny ability to sense when I'm starting to drift off into my shell, when I'm creating that invisible distance. She gently but persistently pulls me back into the connection, refusing to let me disappear into my comfortable isolation. And then there is my friend Max, who has absolute zero respect for my walls. She would just barge right through them. Doesn't matter if I'm being distant or trying to fade away, she will show up. Message, call, practically kick down my door if she has to, just to keep our friendship alive. And she's stubbornly persistent in that way. When I look at the friendships that I've lost, the real insight comes when I understood that this wasn't just about individual relationships, but about my relationship with vulnerability itself. My struggles weren't a simple matter of failing at connections, but a complex interplay of hopes, fears, learned behaviors that affected every area of my life where closeness was involved. This brings us to three distinct layers of failure that psychologists have identified. First, there is the objective failure, the measurable outcomes that don't meet defined criteria. Think about missing a sales target or failing an exam. Those are objective failures. Then there is a perceived failure, those subjective experiences that feel like a failure but may not actually be. These are often tied to unrealistic expectations or comparing ourselves to others. In my friendship story, I experienced both types of failures. There was the objective reality of relationships that ended, measurable by unanswered text or cancelled plans or not never meeting again. But there was also this perceived failure. The story I told myself about those endings meant about me as a person. I interpreted normal relationship ebbs and flows as evidence of some fundamental flaw in myself. How often do you feel like you have failed, even when objectively speaking, you haven't? Where might those feelings be coming from? And finally, there is identity based failure, the most profound and painful type. This happens when failure becomes not just an event, but a definition of self. When we move from I failed at something to I am failure, those are called identity based failures. This was the most painful part of my friendship struggles. The moment when I stopped thinking, I am having trouble with this relationship, and started believing that I am incapable of deep friendship. That shift from event to the identity transformed a difficult situation into an existential crisis. When you have crossed that invisible line from I fail to I am a failure, how did that feel in your body? Tightness, stillness, shame? Just notice. Take a moment now to recognize this feeling. This is the first step of our REST method. Recognize. Simply acknowledge where you are without judgment. If you're finding these pauses uncomfortable, that's normal. Stay with that discomfort. It's part of the process. Dr. Brené Brown's research reveals something fascinating about this third type of failing. In studying thousands of people's experience with shame and vulnerability, she found that identity-based failures often has roots in what she calls scarcity culture. The persistent feeling that we are never enough, never successful enough, never perfect enough. This becomes even more complex when we examine failures across different cultures. Research from the University of California shows striking differences. In individualistic Western societies, failure is often experienced as a personal shame. In collectivist Eastern cultures, failure frequently manifests as a concern about letting others down. And in some indigenous cultures, the very concept of individual failure is almost foreign and is replaced by collective responsibility and learning. You might find these cultural viewpoints challenging to your own, and that's intentional. Growth often happens at the edges of your comfort zones. Growing up in Indian culture, I noticed something fascinating about how we define failure. It's almost exclusively tied to the markers of external success, be it academic performance, career achievements, financial stability, the list goes on. While my Western influenced mind wanted to label certain relationship endings as failures, my cultural background refused to accept this framing. It's like trying to label the changing of seasons as a failure. It simply doesn't translate. Ironically, this same culture that's so accepting of relationship fluidity can be incredibly rigid about conventional markers of success. A low test score, a missed promotion, a struggling business, these are seen as clear, undeniable failures. The pressure to succeed in these areas is immense and is unforgiving at times. And understanding this cultural contradiction has helped me question my own metrics of failure. Why do I readily accept career setbacks as failures, but resist seeing relationship through the same harsh lens? Perhaps there is wisdom in this cultural distinction. I wonder, what areas of your life do you automatically label as success or failure? And who taught you to see them that way? Before we move to spiritual perspectives, we need to address a powerful force shaping our modern relationship with failure: social media. Research from MIT reveals that we are not just sharing our lives on social media, we are curating alternate realities. One study of 1,000 young professionals showed that over 80% regularly edit out failures from their online narratives. We are creating highlight reels that make everyone else feel like they are the only ones who are struggling. I remember scrolling through Instagram during a very difficult period of my life when one of my closest friendships was dissolving. While privately struggling with loneliness and feeling like a failure at connection, I was still posting carefully filtered images of living my best life. The contrast between my public persona and my private pain was jarring. Meanwhile, I was watching my friends' seemingly perfect social lives unfold online, wondering why I alone couldn't maintain meaningful connections. The irony, of course, is that many of them were likely experiencing similar struggles behind their carefully curated feeds. As you're listening right now, what parts of your story have you been editing out? What would it feel like to acknowledge the full truth of your journey, both the highlight reel and the cutting room floor? The impact is quantifiable. Over 70% report feeling like failures compared to their social media peers. Anxiety rates spike after 30 minutes of social comparison. The highlight reel effect creates unrealistic recovery timelines for failure. This digital distortion of failure creates three specific challenges. The compression of recovery time. We expect to bounce back as quickly as others seem to. The illusion of universal success. We think everyone else is succeeding while we alone are failing. The third is the pressure of failure monetization. The expectation to immediately turn our failures into inspiring comeback stories. The ones that you hear in TED Talks and most of the established platforms. In my journey with friendship, I felt all three of these pressures. I expected myself to get over lost connections quickly, convinced myself I was the only one struggling with maintaining relationships, and felt the pressure to transform my pain into wisdom before I had fully processed it. Understanding these cultural forces helped me give myself permission to heal at my own pace. When was the last time you gave yourself permission to simply experience failure without immediately needing to transform it into a lesson or a story of triumph? When we fail, it often feels like we are falling off the map, lost and uncharted. But many spiritual traditions see failure not as a dead end, but as a threshold, a place where something new can begin. Let me share two lenses that help me make sense of my own friendship setbacks. Let's start with a Buddhist insight. In Buddhism, the first noble truth reminds us that suffering is part of life. That doesn't mean every hardship is joyful. It means pain and failure are woven into the human fabric. One teacher I read says, when you push against suffering, you only make it sharper. When you meet it with curiosity, it can become a doorway. When I first encountered this teaching, I was in the midst of grieving a friendship that had slowly dissolved. Each morning, I would wake up with some familiar ache, wondering why they had stopped responding, what I had done. My first instinct was to push the pain away, to distract myself, or to rationalize it. But one day I tried something different. Instead of running from the hurt, I sat with it. Picture this: you've just faced a painful loss, a friendship that ended, a project that collapsed. Your instinct is to numb it or to fix it. But this Buddhist practice invites you to pause and notice, where do you feel that heartbreak in your body? Feel that ache, maybe like a rock in your chest or a knot in your stomach. As you breathe into that place, sitting with that ache, you begin to see the pain itself is not the enemy. Resisting it is. By allowing yourself to feel, you open a small space for insight. What is this failure teaching me about my attachments? That question doesn't erase the hurt, but it can shift you from why me to what's next. For me, sitting with the pain of lost friendship revealed how tightly I had been gripping my expectations of how relationships should unfold. I saw how my fear of abandonment had created a self fulfilling prophecy. In Christianity, one of the most radical ideas is the concept of cross, not just as a salvation, but as a holy ground for faith. I mean, we are all aware of the story of Peter denying Jesus 3 times, is often told as a caution. Don't falter. But Today, I invite us to see it differently. Peter's shame wasn't the end, it was a place where grace could meet. This perspective transformed how I viewed one particular relationship breakdown that left me feeling ashamed and exposed. I had shared my vulnerability with someone who later used that against me. The betrayal felt crushing, not just because I had lost a friend, but because I blamed myself for trusting someone unwisely. Think of that moment. Imagine the weight of guilt crushing Peter's chest, the loss of identity. I am the rock, yet I fail. One should also remember Jesus had told him in advance that he is going to deny him. Instead of erasing that shame, the tradition invites him to let it teach him. Later, when he weeps and is forgiven, it isn't because he deserves it, it is because love finds him in the faith. Like Peter, I found myself in the place where my identity seemed shattered. I thought I was discerning about who to trust, and yet I failed. The mystical tradition didn't offer me any quick fix, but something more profound, the possibility that this very place of failure could become the sacred ground. Not because betrayal was good, but because even there I wasn't abandoned. Even in my worst judgment, grace find. How does that help us today? When we fall short, like lose a job, break a promise, end a friendship, we can't fast forward to forgiveness. Lord Jesus Christ speaks to human failure not with condemnation, but mercy, hope, and a promise of redemption. You might be thinking that sounds very poetic, great, but in the middle of my shame, I just feel stuck. I hear you. The invitation isn't to feel better right away, it's to trust that even in the darkest moment, something sacred can be blooming beneath the surface. When you feel the shame of your failures, just whisper this to yourself. Here I am, as I am. Hold me in my falling. Here I am, as I am. Hold me in my falling. It's not a magic formula, just a reminder that you are not alone. Before we move on, let's take a moment. Notice how it feels to sit with those two perspectives. Buddhism's teaching that suffering becomes a doorway when met with curiosity, and Christianity's view of failure as a holy ground where love meets condemnation. In my own journey with friendship failures, I found that these aren't just abstract spiritual concepts, they are practical pathways through pain. When I stopped fighting against the reality of relationships that I have ended and instead approached that curiosity, I discovered insights about myself I couldn't have found any other way. When I allowed my deepest shame about connection to become sacred ground rather than something to hide, I found a compassion for myself that has gradually extended to others. The fact that I am sharing these personal stories of my relationship failures or my friendship failures is me trying to make it a secret, not hiding it from others. If you ever felt failure as a dead end, what shifts when you imagine it as a doorway or as a sacred soil? Take another breath. We are about to dive into some complex psychological concepts. Don't worry, if you don't grasp everything immediately, the goal is to plant seeds of understanding that can grow over time. Spiritual insights give us such rich metaphors. Now, let's look at what modern psychology reveals about failure, how our brains and heart actually respond, and what we can do to shift that response. Let's talk about what happens in your brain when you fail. It's actually fascinating. When we fail, our brain doesn't treat it like a single event. Instead, it's more like hitting play on an old mixtape of memories. Dr. Daniela Schiller's work shows that a new failure can activate old wounds, like Christmas lights on a string. When one lights up, they all do. I experienced this neural cascade firsthand when a casual text from a friend went unanswered for days. Logically, I knew they were probably just busy, but my brain immediately connected this minor incident to every friendship rejection I had ever experienced. From playground exclusions to deep betrayals in adulthood. My chest tightened, and I suddenly wasn't dealing with an unanswered text. I was reliving an entire lifetime of connection failures. The good news, neuroscience also tells us that our brains are plastic. They can change. Dr. Christian Neff's research on self compassion shows that offering ourselves kindness actually dampens the alarm signals in the pain centers. Self compassion literally turns down the volume on our brain's pain alarm. Learning this changed how I responded to some of the disappointments. Instead of spiraling into self criticism when pulled away, I now started practicing self compassion. This hurts, and that's normal. Many people struggle with maintaining connections. This simple shift does not make pain disappear, but it makes it much more bearable. So, next time you fail, try speaking to yourself as you would to a friend. I see you hurting. This is tough. You are allowed to feel this. It isn't easy at first, and your inner critic may scream back, but over time, those few words can retrain your brain to respond more gently to pain. For years, I approached friendship with a fixed mindset. Each time a relationship faded, I thought I am just not good at maintaining connections. This became self fulfilling, but gradually I began experimenting with a growth perspective. This particular friendship didn't last, but what can I learn about communication, boundaries, or vulnerability that might help my future connections? I once believed that failing at a project meant I wasn't cut out for that work, but by leaning into a growth mindset, asking, what can I learn here? I found new strengths that I didn't know I had. Instead of hiding from feedback, I started seeking it. Instead of equating failure with worthlessness, I began to see it as information. Like I said, all of this are something that I've started doing. I'm not an expert. I don't do it all the time, but I've started. This mindset shift has transformed my approach to relationships. I started asking trusted friends for honest feedback about how I show up in friendships. One person gently pointed out that I often withdraw when I feel vulnerable rather than communicating my needs. And that insight, painful as it was to hear, gave me something concrete to work on rather than a permanent character flaw to accept. Even now, like when I am talking to friends, I can go deeper into understanding what they are feeling and how they are feeling. Yet, I feel uncomfortable sharing how I am feeling. I try to shift the conversation back to them because it makes me uncomfortable talking about myself. But I've started realizing that, and I started changing my approach, and it has helped. If you catch yourself thinking, I'm just not good with people, try reframing it. I haven't yet learned how to connect in this situation. That tiny shift, moving from I am to I haven't yet, creates space for possibility. It's a powerful way to interrupt the shame spiral. Self compassion isn't about cheerleading yourself through pain, it's about facing your struggle with warmth and understanding. Dr. Kristin Neff's research shows that self compassion activates brain's soothing system, our built in capacity for calm and safety. Even a brief practice, placing a hand over your heart and silently saying, this is hard right now, I am not alone. This is hard right now, I am not alone, can create physiological relaxation. Let's try it now. Place your hand over your heart. Breathe in. And as you breathe out, say to yourself, this is hard. I am doing my best. Recently, when I reached out to reconnect with someone I didn't hear back, I placed my hand and acknowledged this rejection stings. Many people struggle with this. And that simple gesture helped me move from disappointment without getting stuck in it. Let's pause and reflect. We've explored how failure can activate old pain, but also lead to healing. How mindset shapes whether failure becomes feedback. How self compassion helps the nervous system feel safer. These insights have transformed my relationship with failures. Understanding my brain's failure network helps me recognize when a small disappointment is triggering an old wound. Embracing a growth mindset allows me to see relationship challenges as opportunity to develop new skills rather than the evidence of inherent flaws. And practicing self-compassion gives me emotional resilience to stay open to connection even after being hurt. Now, before we continue, let's reflect on one experience of failure you've got. Where did you feel it in your body? Did you meet it with self compassion? Or did you push it away? How might you reframe that moment from I am a failure to I am learning? This reflection is a powerful example of the shared step in our rest method. Even if you are just sharing this with yourself right now, you are breaking the isolation that often comes with a failure. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to share this experience with someone you trust today. Notice how a simple act of sharing can begin to transform your relationship with failure. In the next section, we'll move from understanding to practice. How to work with failure in everyday life through simple 4-step method. I'll share the practical method that I've been talking about through this podcast, which is the REST method, the REST. As you listen, remember that this isn't about perfection. It's a framework to experiment with, not a set of rigid rules. Your journey with failure is uniquely yours. The REST method, it's not complex. It's a simple practice. R in REST stands for recognize, E for embrace, S for share, and T for transform. First, recognize. This is about honestly acknowledging the failure and its impact on you. Not minimizing it, not over exaggerating, just seeing it as is. The second step is embrace. This doesn't mean loving your failure or forcing gratitude before you are ready. It means embracing the full experience, the disappointment, the lessons, and especially the emotions that come with failure. Embrace it. The third step is share. Failure thrives in isolation. When we keep our failures secret, shame grows. But when we share them with trusted others, something remarkable happens. And the final step is transform. This isn't about forcing a silver lining narrative or immediately turning your failure into a success story. It's about allowing the experience to change you in whatever way is authentic. For me, transformation from that friendship loss wasn't what I expected. Rather than making me more guarded about future connections, it gradually helped me become more authentic in all my relationships. I realized how much energy I had been spending trying to be the perfect friend, always available, never needing too much, carefully editing myself to be more likable. Before we move on, I invite you to think about a recent disappointment or a failure in your life. Apply the REST method. Recognize it, embrace it, share it, transform it. What makes this approach powerful is its simplicity. You don't need special tools or techniques, just a willingness to stay present with your experience and move through these 4 steps at your own pace. And I emphasize at your own pace. It took me multiple attempts to get through each stage of rest. It is difficult. It is extremely uncomfortable. And that's why I would request you to do it at your own pace. Rest isn't about rushing through failure to get to success. Failures are not stepping stones to success. This is about creating a different relationship with failure itself, one that honors both its difficulty and its potential to transformation. I should add, I don't always use this method successfully. Like I said, there are plenty of times when I get caught in old patterns, when I beat myself up over some failure or try to hide. I am still becoming, still practicing, still learning. But when I do remember to use this approach, it genuinely helps. It creates a gentler, more honest relationship with failure that feels sustainable rather than exhausting. As we approach the end of today's journey, take a moment to acknowledge yourself. Exploring failure isn't easy. By staying with this conversation, you've shown courage and willingness to grow. Remember, discomfort is often a sign of expansion. Failure is not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be faced, something to learn from, something we all share. And nowhere is this truer than in our deepest human connections. As I sit here recording this, I am aware of my own unfinished friendship stories, the relationships that I'm still figuring out, the connections I'm learning to nurture differently, the ways I'm still becoming more authentic in how I show up with others. And there is something deeply comforting about admitting that loud to you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening. My personal journey with friendship failures continues, Just last month, I reached out to someone I had lost touch with years ago. The conversation was awkward at first, both of us dancing around the unspoken question of why we had drifted apart. But there was also something beautiful in that awkwardness, a mutual acknowledgement that connection is messy and that we are still learning how to do this thing together. Perhaps the most important insight isn't found in research or practices. It is found in the simple truth that our relationship with failure reflects our relationship with our own humanity. The poet Mary Oliver writes, "Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine." Maybe this is how we begin again, not by erasing our failures, but by sharing them. Not by becoming perfect at relationship, but by becoming more honest about their complexity. You are still becoming in your friendships, in your connections, in your capacity to love and be loved. And that's exactly where you need to take a deep breath. Notice how you feel after this exploration of failure. Whatever you're feeling, discomfort, relief, confusion, hope, it's all valid. This is part of the process of growth. Before we wrap up, let's recap the key takeaways from today's exploration. Failure is a universal human experience shaped by cultural and personal contexts. Spiritual traditions offer unique perspectives on failure as a teacher and as a sacred ground. Our brains are wired to react strongly to failure, but we can rewire these responses. The REST method: recognize, embrace, share, transform. It's a practical framework for working with our failure. Our relationship with failure reflects our relationship with our own humanity. Remember, you are not alone in your struggles with failure. We are still becoming. As we close today's episode, I want to acknowledge something. Sitting with this failure wasn't easy. If parts of this conversation stirred up difficult emotions or memories for you, that's completely normal. Be gentle with yourself in this process. Until next time, remember, you are not failing at life, you are practicing at it. And that practice is sacred work. This is Anish, still becoming, right alongside you. If you want to stay connected between episodes, subscribe to my Substack at iamstillbecoming.substack.com. You can follow our Instagram account on iamstill_becoming.